Chapter 4. The warm racing light dropped them at the base of the Himalayas, and Keith pulled his cape tighter around his shoulders. Couldn't they have picked a warmer mountain range to build this place? He grumbled as he trudged up the snow-covered path to the sanctuary. I'm pretty sure they needed as much room as possible, Sophie reminded him. The sanctuary housed all of the creatures that the elves had taken into protective custody. Everything from dinosaurs to dodo birds, plus any animal that humans foolishly believed was magical. They even kept endangered species, wanting to make sure they continued to thrive. The elves believed every creature existed on the planet for a reason, and to allow even one to go extinct would cause irreparable damage to the delicate balance of the world. An icy blast of wind cut through Sophie's tunic, making her wish she'd worn a cape. She always felt dumb wearing them, but braving the snow without a cloak was definitely dumber. She also wished she'd taken Dex's offers a few months back and let him teach her how to regulate her body temperature. Here, Keith said, dropping his cape over her shoulder. I'm fine, you don't have to. That would be a lot more convincing without all the shivering, he interrupted. Besides, it takes more than a little snow to get to me. He flashed a smug smirk, but she could see he was already shivering. You don't know how to regulate your body temperature either? She asked, feeling her voice steady as Keith fastened the warm cape under her chin. That only works when it's sort of cold, not freezing. But no, I've never learned. That's the kind of random skill that you only learn in Exilium. The name caused a whole different kind of shudder. Exilium was a school the council had threatened to send Sophie if she couldn't hack it at a Foxfire. She didn't know anything about it except that people kept telling her she didn't want to go there. Why does Dex know how to regulate his temperature then? Sophie asked. The only school he'd ever attended was Foxfire. He laughed. Are you really surprised his family would teach him something weird? Good point. Dex's parents were known for playing by their own rules and not following social conventions. His dad had been even admitted that he designed their store, Slurps and Burps, to be intentionally bizarre and chaotic, just to make the stuffy nobles, as he liked to call them, squirm while they shopped for their elixirs. Keith shivered again, his whole body shaken, and Sophie tried to hand him back his cape. Nope, you deserve it, Foster, he insisted. You have saved my life a few times, after all. Only once, Sophie corrected. Yeah, well, you also saved the whole world from the Everblaze, so that counts too. Plus, I'll face the wrath of Gigantor if I let you freeze to death, remember? Well, thanks, she mumbled as he pulled the hood up over his head, warming her icy ears. He held her gaze for a second too long before he backed away and shrugged. Just don't lose the sense and crest. My father will strangle me. He clearly meant it as a joke, but it reminded Sophie of his mother's bruise, and the way she tried to hide it, and the way Lord Cassius has rushed them out of there after she saw it. So, she said, not quite sure how to broach the subject as they went back to trudging through the snow. Everything's okay at your house, right? If you leave out my father's constant lectures on how I'm not living up to my potential, then yeah, why? No reason. Push, there's always a reason with you, Foster. Spill it. Sophie tugged out a snow-covered eyelash, wishing for a little extra courage as she flicked away. Just, your dad is never... Keith stopped walking. Ever what? Sophie sighed. They were so much harder than it seemed on television. When your dad gets angry, does he ever hurt anyone? The last words came out as a whisper. He laughed, but his smile quickly faded. Wait, you serious? Wow, I know my dad has the whole stern and angry, scary thing going on for him, but still, that's crazy. So that's a no then, she asked, needing to hear him say it. Yeah, definitely a no. You really thought... I don't know, your mom had a red wound on her shoulder. She did? Yeah, and your dad looked like he didn't want me to see it. Well, I have no idea what that was about, but it's not what you're thinking. People don't do that around here, remember? That whole guilt-shattering out sanity thing? That goes for violence too. The elves did seem to be incredibly peaceful. They didn't even have police. And yet Sophie could still remember the searing pain as her kidnappers burned her wrists, trying to force her to answer his questions. Sophie could still see the dead look in Dex's eyes as the rebels blasted him with the paralyzing melter over and over. She could still hear the crunch of Sylvain's wing breaking when the rebels dragged out of the sky, right before they broke several of Keith's ribs in a fight. Either elves were capable of more than they realized, or the rebels were insane. She didn't know which one would be worse. Okay, well, sorry, she said quietly. I just wanted to make sure. No need to apologize. It's nice to know the mysterious Miss F cares. Neither of them seemed to know what to say after that, so they walked in uncomfortable silence as their flat shoes crunched, crunched through the snow. I don't understand how humans haven't found this place, Sophie said when they reached the towering silver gates into the mountain. But then she spotted the round black obscuras scattered among the various rocky outcroppings. Careful, Keith warned, pointing at a bunch of silver folk-like gadgets that were stabbed into the ground next to some of the rocks. Those are effluxers. Step too close and they'll make you stink like you've been hanging around a pack of gallons. My dad set one of them while the gnomes were installing them, and when he got home, I could smell him all the way on the 187th floor. I guess the smell damages odd sinuses or something. Orgs? Sophie asked, taking a giant step away from the stinky gadgets. Yep, one of the goblin patrols found some weird footprints a few nights ago and thought they might be from Orgs. They couldn't tell for sure because the tracks had no scent, and by the time Alvar got here, Fitz's brother? Sophie interrupted. Yeah, he's been working with the Orgs for a few years, so my dad figured he'd be able to tell if they were involved. But by the time he got here, it had snowed and the tracks were gone. So the council had the fluxers installed just in case. Okay, Sophie said slowly. But I thought we had a treaty with the Orgs. We do, but that doesn't mean we trust them. Look at what happened with the humans. Throughout the centuries, the elves had signed treaties with all of the intelligent creatures, trying to ensure peace. But humans decided they wanted to rule the world, and in order to prevent a war, the elves chose to disappear. They still watched from the shadows, finding subtle ways to share their wisdom when they could. But the humans continued their path of violence and destruction, and eventually the elves had to cut off contact completely. And yet, Black Swan broke every law, risking their sanity and their lives, especially so they could hide Sophie among humans. She still didn't understand why. Why would the Orgs care about the sanctuary? She asked, studying the massive gates. Hello? Sylvain's in there? Remember the whole timeline to extinction thing? She did. The elves had been searching for a female alicorn for decades, desperate to breed her with the only alicorn they'd ever found, a male already at the sanctuary. If they couldn't start repopulating the species soon, alicorns would be the first creature to go extinct. But Sophie still didn't see why Orgs would care about a couple of sparkly flying horses. Grady had told her once that the Orgs didn't value animals' life the way elves did. What else would have made it? Who would have made the footprints, though? Do we need to knock or something? She asked, ready to get to the other, much safer side of the gates. I'm sure they are scanning our registry pendants now to make sure we have the right clearance. Sophie's hand darted to her neck, her fingers closing around a triangular crystal hanging from her choker. The council had added extra chains to hers after the kidnappers cut her first pendant off, but she still liked to double-check that it was there. Finally, Keith said as a loud clang echoed off the mountains. The ground shook when the silver gates swung apart, and a blast of warmth prickled Sophie's skin as she followed Keith into the sunny paradise. She knew she was walking deep into a mountain range, but she had a hard time believing it as she stared at the lush meadows and forests of flowering trees that seemed to stretch on forever. The sky was a perfect cerulean blue, though it shifted with every step, flashing through the colors of the spectrum as if it were walking inside a rainbow, and the air had a crisp sweetness, like biting into an apple. How much of this is real? She asked, rubbing her eyes, half expecting it to disappear. The sky is an illusion, and they hit the walls to make the space feel bigger, but everything else is real. How did they? You're late! A tall, skinny elf interrupted as he stepped out of a clump of bushes. His chocolate-brown tunic was covered in bright green patches, and his thick black hair hung in long tangles. Do you have any idea how much trouble that's caused me? Sorry, sir, Sophie mumbled, avoiding his piercing blue eyes. He laughed, a bitter sound that felt sharp in her ears. "I am many things, Miss Foster, but I am definitely not a sir. You may call me Jurek. I am the equestrian caretaker for the sanctuary. And I was right, wasn't I?" Sophie glanced at Keith, but he looked just as confused as her. "Right." Jurek pulled a lumpy satchel out of one of the bushes and slung it over his shoulder, motioning for Sophie and Keith to follow them. "You couldn't teleport here, could you?" No, she admitted. "How did you know?" He smiled. "Tell me this. If you could teleport in the sanctuary, why have the alicorns never teleported out?" That was a very good question. She squinted at the rainbow sky, which wasn't really a sky at all. "Is it the mountains?" "That'd be my guess. Keep light leapers away. Why not teleporters? But then, what do I know? I'm not the one with the fancy abilities and the strange eyes." "Well, you clearly know more than me," she said, ignoring the insult. She was getting used to being the only brown-eyed elf. "So wait, she can't teleport through anything solid?" Keith asked, frowning when Jurek and Sophie both nodded. Dang, that's going to kill a bunch of my plans. But don't worry, Foster, there's still plenty of ways we can cause trouble." He nudged Sophie, but she couldn't return his smile. She liked knowing that if the council didn't give permission to heal Prentice, she could teleport to exile on her own. But the isolated prison was buried deep to the center of the earth, so she couldn't if she couldn't teleport through anything solid, there was no way she could reach it on her own. "Whoa, hang on a minute," Heath said, stepping in front of Jurek to block his path. "You didn't think it might be a good idea to be like, 'Hey guys, that teleporting to the sanctuary thing might not work out as well. You could get trapped in that creepy black voidy place.'" "Actually," I told her father, "he informed me that as a talentless, it's my job to tend to the animals and prepare for visitors, not to pretend to know things about special abilities." Sophie cringed. Elves without special abilities were just as wealthy as other elves, and supposedly they were still equals. But they also didn't qualify for the elite levels at Foxfire, couldn't become members of the nobility, and wore different clothes for their jobs in working class cities. And sometimes it seemed like people saw them as lesser. But that mostly happened with jerks like Vika, Timken, and Stina Hex, a family who loved to think they were better than everyone. Sophie hated to think that Grady was like that. "Grady really said that?" she asked quietly. "Who's Grady?" "My father." She was surprised at how easily the word rolled off her tongue. Grady and Adeline had only adopted Sophie about 3 months earlier, after a rocky process, and she still didn't quite feel comfortable calling them Mom and Dad. Jurek pointed to the Simpson crest on her cape. "I thought Lord Cassius was your adopted father." "Oh no, this is Keith's." And she could totally see Keith's dad saying that. Jurek snorted. "I guess I should have known. They both have that same smug smirk." "Yeah, but I have better hair," Keith said, mussing it even more as Sophie gave him back his cape. "Let's hope that's not the only way you're better." Jurek walked away without another word. Keith rolled his eyes like he didn't care, but Sophie noticed he hid the Simpson crest in the thick folds of his cape before he followed. She trailed silently behind, staring at the shimmering flowers and trying to think of something to say. After several awkward seconds, Keith cleared his throat. "So where's Glitterbert?" He means Sylvanie," Sophie clarified. And she'd been wondering the same thing. The pastures around them only held grazing mammoths, feathery dinosaur, and enormous wolf-bear things. "All equestrians are in the violet pastures," Jurek explained as he veered off the path to cut straight over a line of hills. The long blue grass was slick with dew, and Sophie struggled not to slip as she ran behind him. By the time they crested the last hill, she was sweaty and out of breath, but she didn't mind one bit when a familiar voice filled her mind. "Friend! Sophie! Keith! Visit!" "Yes," Sophie transmitted back, shielding her eyes as she tried to find her. A pair of silver and black unicorns galloped in one of the purple grass fields, and a small river was lined with strange bluish-green horses that seemed almost slimy, but no sparkly alicorns in sight. "She prefers the pastures down here," Jurek said before plopping to the grass and sliding down the hill. Keith launched after Jurek immediately, but Sophie stared at the slope, fairly certain the slide would end up with an elven visit. It was only when Keith shouted, "Come on, Foster, don't wimp out on me now," that she dropped to the ground and pushed off after them. Bits of grass and mud peppered her face, and she could tell her backside would be bruised for days. But she bumped and bobbed and somehow made it safely to the bottom. Well, almost safely. Stopping was harder than she thought, and she ended up crashing into Keith, knocking him on top of her. If you're trying to sweep me off my feet, there are less painful ways, he told her, laughing as she struggled to stand. Sophie turned away to hide her burning cheeks. Was the sliding really necessary? She asked Jurek. No, but it was fun. Jurek tossed his wild hair, sending bits of grass flying. Friend, Sophie, Keith, fly. Sophie spun around, the feeling tears prick her eyes as she spotted a glittering streak, flipping somersaults in the rainbow sky. Part of her had worried Sylvie's wing wouldn't ever heal properly, but clearly she was good as new, and just as sparkly as ever. She's happy to see me, isn't she? Keith asked. Not as happy as she is to see me, though Sophie wished there was a bit less Keith filling her head, and she was less than thrilled when Sylvie tugged her wings and dove, landing next to Keith with an exuberant whinny. See, Glitterbat loves me. Keith reached to pat her sparkly rump, but Sylvie scooted away, snapping at her tail. I told you she hates that nickname, Sophie said smugly. She tried to call Sylvie to her side, but Sylvie was too busy chasing her tail to obey. Keith frowned. Do you feel that, Foster? Sort of. Sophie closed her eyes, trying to sort through the dizzying emotions swirling in her head. She'd forgotten how overwhelming Sylvie's energy could be. Come, she transmitted. But Sylvie kept on spinning, and the more she circled, the more Sophie picked up a darker emotion in the mix. Why are you afraid? She asked, repeating the question until Sylvie finally stopped to look at her. A rush of fear clawed at Sophie's mind like an angry vermin, and she stepped back, needing room to breathe. What is she afraid of? It's probably easier to show you. Jorik opened the satchel he'd been carrying and pulled out a handful of twisty blue stalks, filling the air with a spicy cinnamon scent. Sylvie's hunger clouded Sophie's mind, but the alicorn backed away from the treats. Why would she? An ear-splitting whinny cut Sophie off, and Sylvie reared back as a blur of silver dropped out of the sky. Jorik barely managed to pull Keith out of the way before a huge alicorn with blue-tipped wings landed right where he'd been standing. This is Greyfell, Jorik said, tossing the handful of treats to distract the new alicorn while he swung a golden lasso around the massive horse's neck. Greyfall bucked and thrashed and wrestled against the restraint, but Jurek managed to hold tight. He is a resident male, and up until a few days ago, he and Sylvie were getting along just fine. So what changed? Sophie asked as Sylvie screeched and launched back into the sky. I have no idea. Jurek tried to stroke Greyfell's nose, but the alicorn glared at him with the coldest brown eyes Sophie had ever seen. That's what you're here to figure out, and you'd better do it quick. Otherwise, I'm afraid he's going to kill Sylvie.